But let's start and people will join us when they will. Today we're here to talk about performance art, but we will discuss it in the context of practice. And I have 4 practitioners here with me: Jake Orloff, Neil Butler, Dr. Constantine, and Benedict. And we will talk a little bit more about their practice. You will hear it from them. But I would like to bring them into the conversation, perhaps in such a way that you introduce yourselves individually and your practice, but also feel free to comment on each other's practice, and wherever it resonates, perhaps you bring in some of your own insights. What's interesting is Jake works in the context of theatre, Venery in the context of movement, Dr. Constantine with a long history of performance art in Sri Lanka, and Neil Butler with a long history of live art internationally. We'll also look at it in the context of a continuum and the changing definitions and perceptions that we have as audience members. So part of the reason why we are all sitting like this is that you are also part of the conversation. Any questions, any thoughts, anything you hate about performance art, we're willing to take on board. And a lot of people say that when they are, when I did some reading about it, and a lot of journalists especially talk about putting their sort of blinkers on when they go in for performance art, because there's going to be a lot of, not blinkers, shit filters on when they're going to see performance art, just because there's a reservation with something of what they're about to see. And perhaps we can talk about what those reservations are. Just to start the conversation, I think when we talk about performance art, 3 things become significant. One is the idea of the body present in that moment. The other is the idea of a concept, the way in which we are open to a shifting narrative or experimenting with that idea of narrative. And thirdly, your relationship with an audience, the way in which you experiment with that to make an audience more present perhaps in the immediacy of that moment. So let's start perhaps with Neil to just talk a bit about defining performance art.
Well, I'm going to cheat because I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to, as talking to my friends about this meeting, I'm going to tell you what it says in the dictionary, which is the cheat bit, and then I'll tell you what I think. And the dictionary is, I think, one of the most helpful. There's 2 really helpful things which said. One is that, and let's just establish, for the sake of argument, that live art and performance art are kind of interchangeable. They aren't actually interchangeable, and some people will argue about that, which is to save ourselves at least one of argument. Let's say that live art and performance art are interchangeable. And they say is live art can be defined as artwork that broadly embraces ephemeral, time-based, visual and performing arts events that includes human presence and broadly challenge or question traditional views of the arts. Okay? And that comes from the Live Art Archive. It's quite a chunky thing to say, and it's not really what I'd say. Historically, live art comes, it's referred to as performance art and action art, and there are immediate precursor happenings, and that together with the development of performance since the 1960s. And so it's kind of, in some people's heads, it's kind of very much just a 20th century idea, and that there's a kind of root that probably went from Dadaism and Futurism and the various movements in the arts, but they sort of really came together in what were called happenings in the 60s, and then moved forwards from there into performance in its various forms. The best definition, the one which is most entertaining, is live art is live art by artists. And I think that's a really good definition. And it is really quite simply, and it's my starting point, the definition is saying that intention of the artist. It is an artist who might be painting, might be moving, might be speaking, but instead of using a canvas and paint, they use their body. And the only thing in your opening remarks I take issue with is the word narrative. Is that narrative in a theatrical sense has no meaning in live art. There's absolutely no reason to have to subscribe to any form of narrative. So that's a theatrical construction. And Ruani and I, when we were discussing this in curatorial discussions and in the development towards this evening, I guess, we were talking about that very interesting continuum in performance that takes you from narrative performance and narrative dance and narrative visual art, if you like, through an area that then gets you to work which is very conceptual and where there's no place. And so, and that's kind of where this discussion, I imagine, might take place. And I think what's very interesting is that, you know, what has been, I mean, to me, things which have occurred during this Biennale under the description of live art aren't necessarily live art. And that's where we can start having arguments. But essentially to me, and I must say that my start to this, it's really important for me to say this, my start to this was when I was very young, in 1977, I met an artist called Roger Eden, who had been to Leeds Polytechnic in England. It's near Bradford. And Leeds Polytechnic had established itself as a place where live art was very important. And there was a writer called Jeff Nuttall, who wrote a famous book called Bomb Culture. There was an artist called John Fox, who's head of a company called Welfare State, who was the most important theatrical company working in community arts in England for many years. And there was a whole group of artists who were concerned with how performance, how the body could be used to say and ask the things that artists wish to address. And there was an artist called Ian Hitchcliffe who was introduced to me, and I hated him. He was so confrontational and difficult. He would go into a pub and he would play piano in an incredibly aggressive way and eat glass. And I was very young and I just couldn't understand why anybody could think that this obnoxious, aggressive, violent behaviour had anything to do with art. And then I learned to appreciate over many years that he was a great artist. And my friend Roger introduced me to this area of work, and together we set up the Rising Contemporary Art Festival in 1977, which basically we did what we were doing here. We looked around us and we saw what is the most exciting things occurring in performance at the moment. Let's bring them together and let's create a festival to celebrate them. And the people that we brought together were Lumiere and Son. These sorts of names might be nothing, but I'm just going to say that it was like a religious incantation. But there was Lumiere and Son, there was Hesitate to Demonstrate, there was Jeff Nuttall, there's a company, there was Roger Eden. There's a whole group of artists who then progressed through the 70s and the 80s, becoming very influential, but also often ignored because they sat outside the mainstream of artistic discourse. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and I was getting immensely excited. I was excited by the bravery of the work, that an artist was there and they were addressing, as you said, they were there with the audience. The work could not work without the audience. If somebody does a photograph of performance art, you're looking at documentation, you are not looking at performance art. Performance art does not exist on paper. And to me, it was what drew the performance art was this bravery and this immediacy, and the fact that it was utterly ephemeral. When we saw Bamboo, with time, we've seen this documentation. I know why it's important those photographs are in the JPL gallery. It's important that they are part of this Biennale. But actually, when he was ironing on the street, that was where the work was, not in the workplace.
Thank you for that, actually. And thank you for pointing out, I think when I said narrative, I actually meant the emergence of the conceptual as opposed to the narrative in the context of the story. But also, Jake, can I bring you into the conversation at this point to respond perhaps? As a practitioner in theatre, where something does exist on a paper, and then how you mediated your way into a live art segment here. And if I can provoke you a little bit more, to read out something by Marina Abramovic, a performance artist, who says, to be a performance artist, you have to hate theatre. Theatre is fake. The knife is not real, the blood is not real, and the emotions are not real. Performance is just the opposite. The knife is real, the blood is real, and the emotions are real.
That's right.
I thought because in principle, the place that I could go.
Just about going back to the narrative, thanks for clarifying that. I think we need to see a narrative as not a linear construct within the theatre, but also a manner of communicating. And there is a narrative to non-representational dance, for example, that I don't think can be removed and sort of set aside in isolation. That's something that I feel strongly about. But going back to the immediacy, I think perhaps there is an immediacy in live performance or performance art that there isn't in theatre because of the way it's constructed. And also that's not to say that you can speak for all theatres. There is a lot of conceptual work that is being done in the theatre today. The narrative, spoken word, and so to say that all theatre is fake, I think is a problem. I also feel that the immediacy, there is an immediacy to theatre that perhaps is different to the immediacy of performance art. And we can sort of discuss what is more significant in that sense. Sorry, at the coordinate, I sort of switched on at some point.
To be a performance artist, you have to hate theatre. Theatre is fake, the knife is not real, the blood is not real, and the emotions are not real. Performance is just the opposite, the knife is real, the blood is real, and the emotions are real.
Before I respond to this, I'm going to go back to something Neil said about the starting point and then definitions. I think we're at a place now where the disciplines are also starting to become a little more blurred. So a theatre practitioner might use paint or sand or installation, and there might be also visual artists who decides to use spoken word in a performance. That might become live art, but then again, when the theatre practitioner from a theatre background enters the area of live art or performance art, there is an importance or a significance placed on their own practice. So for myself, the spoken word is important. It's not crucial, but it is important. So when we enter the area of live performance, I think that interdisciplinary approach needs to be factored in. And I can see how it's an offshoot of visual art at some point. But at the moment, I don't think that it can any longer be seen as the in-route to performance art. I think, and then we start questioning what is right for the moment. And I think we need to define it in the present context. I don't know if grasping it means going back to where it started. Okay, does that make sense?
I think to sort of talk about that a little more, can we just quickly stop to ask the audience how many actually saw Bangu's performance in the street? And what were some of the responses that you had to it? Did you find it obnoxious, aggressive behavior? No.
No, I didn't find it obnoxious at all.
Right. And what were some of your thoughts when you saw it?
Well, I understood the concept.
And for you, what was the concept there?
It was basically about ironing your creases out, your past, and constantly renewing, sort of almost like a whitewash, washing of the past and keeping it all clean and nice. So that was the concept that came out for me. I don't know how the others responded. I thought it was wonderful. That.
Same?
Yeah, similar, but I did feel, I mean, one of the, because some person came up to me and said, they told me it was this wonderful that this is happening in the street, and I said, yes, the faces of the passers-by are amazing. And he said, yes, but I wonder, might there be a meaning? And I'm looking at a man taking off all of his clothes, ironing them, making them neat, and putting the dirty clothes back on again. And then I'm thinking, okay, so if this is not just about him and his clothes, what is it about? Well, yes, I do think there's a meaning. And unfortunately, I also think there's a narrative.
That's something that's very present in Bangu's piece, I think. Anusha, some thoughts from you on Bangu's piece?
I'll come back to you.
Anyone else?
Well, only checking the thing about the scene, the documentation.
Right, yeah, that's the one I wanted to
in the gallery, I think clearly it's part of the guiding how you're going to do the work, and certainly with now workers. I think that the last guy being sort of in the gallery and seeing those photographs and seeing the work that we did.
I saw the performance first and then documentation later, so I was like, oh, okay.
But that's just, I mean, I also, I think that this whole, there's no need to document it. There's no need to say, I think possibly now, trying to say that where does it start, where they come from, it's very,
do you think there is a significance to the documentation aspect because it anchors in some way something with the way of reading the live art?
A lot of very, very important live artists will have to refuse to have a logo documentation and think it's maps through the domination and the documents. There's a whole nature of them, all the works that assemble, and there's the imagination and the images that you carry with you. And it's a book of like my favourites because about the Duchamp saying about how people make the work, how they make the work just as much as they understood it. So it's a very strong argument and no documentation.
So
no, or is it that the artists need to document it, or is it the public need to document it? I mean, perhaps the public basically wants to document it, that's a different story. But if the artist wants it documented, perhaps what he says is right.
If that becomes the art,
yeah, if that becomes the art, extension of your performance, then perhaps there is a, I don't know, if a paper documented it for him, that perhaps would have been, that had a different meaning.
yeah, and I think Neil's point is that is separate from the art itself.
Totally,
Yes.
and the irony is that I would also suggest that a lot of the hunger for documentation comes from a desire to please funders,
Yes.
and that you can't justify your existence.
Yes.
And just a little funny story. Ian Smith is my very close friend. Some of you saw him as a performance I was here at the first ever Biennale, and he did a performance which I think was fairly controversial in this that I wasn't like it. But he had this fantastic project where he and his company called Mr. Flaubert, as a group of actors, they went around Scotland dressed as Vikings to apologise to the Scottish people for the rape and pillage and destruction that had been caused 100 years before. And so they were all running around as Vikings and sort of polishing their cars and saying, "Can I help?" You know. and they went to the Arts Council, and the Arts Council said, "How do we must judge what you're doing?" And they said, "There's no documentation, there's live art, there's not none of that. You'll have to come with us." And so the funding officer for Mr. Flabat in Scotland had to put on a Viking costume, go in a white van and suddenly appear in small little villages across Scotland as well. Sensible.
Very sensible. But that brings me to something that the two of you actually touched upon, and that is to actually talk about a way in. While there is a certain imagined sense that the performance art itself encompasses, we need to then now talk about a way in, and perhaps this is a place to bring you in, Dr. Constantine, because you worked in Sri Lanka as a performance artist. You have a very long history from the 1980s. We spoke earlier also about you having worked at the University of Jaffna alongside the performance arts to wave that was present in the University of Jaffna in the 1980s. And perhaps some of how you pushed those boundaries, how you brought an audience in, how people found a way into your work. And I know you have some slides that you want to show us and discuss some of your work.
To start with, I will tell you how I see performance. To regard painting or painting as a medium, you can see that painting is a medium, but paint is one tool, brush is one tool, canvas is one. Like that, if you take the theatre is something, with a representation, is an interpretation of an order at the will of the director. But in performance itself is a medium. It is not a representation. It's like a painting. It speaks for itself. So that's where I thought it would have a direct relationship with the viewer, because in a gallery space or in a painting sort of exhibition space, the intimacy between the artist and the viewer is very close than a proscenium of theatre. So I thought this will be a sort of icebreaking exercise where you get to the audience and be with them and perform a concept. So for me, what is important is a concept, formation of a concept. Like in painting, it's a part of conceptual art and performance art. It's a often called conceptual art. So to explain a concept or to explore philosophy or explore some appreciation, like in John Cage's portrait, you explore the process of appreciation of music by performance. So it becomes a performance by the absence of music. So here also I thought, so if I have a concept, for that only I did this one, the broken palmera, because you know the background of that book, which was yeah, this broken palmera is it's a book which was written by Rajan Chitnamana and Rajan and Sridhar about the war in Japan, and both sides were attacked, like the and the government forces were sort of eliminated in a lot of bad things that happened in Japan during the period when I was a student there. Then Srinagara was my teacher. So when she was shot for writing this book, I felt it very bad, and there was sort of a lot of political things going around. So when I came to Colombo, I thought I could put it in a sort of a more direct way, expressing my own feeling through using my body on both palmera. And I thought I would burn this for artist, for painter. And doing a painting is like giving birth to a child. It's a process. So after that long process, you burn what you have tried to create. That will give a direct meaning of how it felt. So that's what I did in this process. So this was my first performance that was in 1988 in my exhibition. So that's how I look at performance as a direct has to be, it has to have the performance quality to become a performance. An act becomes a performance by its performative quality. So it should speak for itself with the audience. There shouldn't be a narrative as in the common sense of the word. It has to have its own narrative to interact with the audience. So that's what my concept. So this is that were going around in 70s in the art scene that happens. Where, for example, in India in 1971, this sort of happenings were taking place. So I have read about it. So I thought of doing that in my exhibition opening. This is actually a bedpan. It's actually a bedpan from one of the hospital walls. And all the famous people in Colombo came and so yeah, these were the one, because at that time, that was in late 80s and early 90s, there were a lot of anxiety, frustration, and a lot of hate in the community. They are like being home and they are just living life. So everything, visualize everything on the So I thought that conceptual art, performance art, we should sort of try to impart our more feel and more intimate way and try to make the audience also part of the performance act. So that's how I thought to go on.
Do you see anything more, or is that?
These are. This is the first performance resident workshop we had in Unicorn. That's where we started to keep all together. It was the first performance workshop. So we had performance of international caliber like Lee Wen and Barnaby he made Barnaby from Leeds. Barnaby, this is Lee Wen. He's well known. So he also participated. So the first Easter campaign 2001 was mainly focusing on performance, and he was the second man.
Is this when we were started as the other fancy?
No, he started long ago. But this was one of his. He has several internationally. This is the second England residential performance workshop that was in 2003. So these are the main. These I did. Then after that I started working with Colombo in this sort of Colombo's level. This is one of the, in this I would like to just elaborate my idea of it, because I come from Germany. So whenever this was during the height of the problem. So whenever I go in, I will be identified as a Tamil from Japan or Tamil. Tamil means it is, to some extent it is synonymous with Delhi. In Britain, a lot of Sri Lankans are asked, are you LTT? Because BBC always says LTT. So any Sri Lankans regarded as LTT. Here it is the reverse. Like any Tamil is until proved otherwise is an LTT. That was the situation then, not now. So I sort of try to mask myself entirely in paper because our identity is basically text-based, language-based. If you say Tamil, how do you know who is a Tamil? Because you read from papers, you read the instruments, it is text-based. So I thought I will cover myself. That is my identity. You don't see me. You see what you know. So I become a performative person in that model, like Judith Butler's gender model. Here there is a nationality model. I just fit in and I play my role. So that's what I was thinking when I did this. This is how I look at it. Then after that I used to work with one group a long time. These are works we did. This is the first Vienna performance we did. So this was my related performance where I took a cage dove, there is a peace dove, it's a golden cage. So you can have a Victor's peace in a golden cage. So the dove is in that was
Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm just going to go back to something we said in 2001, which shows performance. And perhaps we can invoke something of the history of the fine art practice that performance art seems to constantly evoke. What was the choice when people decided that performance art was the way to go when they chose it?
because actually we were working with Continuum Fine Arts University, myself, Anjali and all were working together in art. Then we thought of having a separate institution for art university. At that time, George Key Foundation was running residential art camps in 5 softwares. So then a funder came, Robert Gould came from Pink Floors. Then we approached him. Then he said there is enough place for another art institution, art camps are there, there are plenty of art camps running institutions for the economy. Then we thought very hard about the new direction that we can find for our art growth. Then we suggested that we have a performance workshop in doing another thing, and that's how it started. The itself was initially started with an idea of
Performance. Just out of curiosity, did you enter into this from a theatre or what was your entry point into performance art or live art?
John Lennon. Really, I think I'd probably have some of my generation because a lot of people who were just listening more and more to music. And then John Lennon met Yoko Ono and famously met her in a gallery and she climbed the stairs and at the top of the steps there's a magnifying glass and there's written in tiny letters was the word yes. And he always said that even though he didn't know what to say hello to her, but because it was so positive and affirmative, he started a relationship. And I think that relationship and then its movement into performance-based work and her influence from the Fluxus movement then became sort of popularised or certainly introduced. I was only 14, I just decided that God didn't exist and John Lennon was the next best thing. And it was only because, at that very young age, that kind of very experimental work was being popularised by my hero at the time, that you started to then really around it and things started to happen. Because at that time it was interesting in that definition that they talked about the happenings and the importance of the happenings and where they came from. Which is another whole, if you want to get into the history of art, which I'm certainly not the right person to ask, but the happenings were really influential because it was just a fabulously exciting melting pot of artists from different fields coming together with entertainers and musicians. So that was really the starting point. And as I said before, my friend Roger and Wolfgang and Leeds, which was very serious. And they were very, very serious artists doing some very difficult, challenging work. And it was about the same time as punk, in fact. So you had this sort of all the things that made punk happen in England in particular or in the UK. At the same time as all this stuff going on in the art world as well. So it opened up to possibilities of people. You didn't have to go to art school to make music art. You didn't have to even accredit education to go to an art gallery, which is very exciting.
And we've spoken before about this continuum, where there is the fine arts context and perhaps a more theatrical on one end of the continuum, where there perhaps is a need in the idea of the concept, but you're moving because you're searching. And perhaps people that come to the conversation at this point as a movement practitioner, because we're talking about making the body present and how you in your practice work this idea of arriving at a contemporary movement in your own practice.
Yeah.
And sorry, just you during the war, when we also just created a piece for Colombo called SL1, and I think if you use that as an example, it might be interesting. Because she was exploring a Sri Lankan ritual, but arriving at it from her own implications.
Well, in that she was using Sri Lankan ritual aspects as a framework for the piece, in order to create a different ritual with some concepts that was working with it. And for me, I'm from a movement background and theatre also a little bit. So I could say that I never studied or learned performance art, but I stumbled upon it in the way in how I wanted to continue with my work, basically. So how I wanted to create performance, I realized how this sort of thing is closer to performance art, maybe than choreography or dance, as it were, the way we normally define it. In the Testimony, for example, I wanted to do this ritualistic laying of bananas in the square to demarcate my space, working with the concept of the banana republic and things like that. And I never rehearsed this before. And for me, it was that this thing of being in the present moment and performing this action, and with the awareness that I am being seen, or there is an audience. So that was in this ritualistic performance, and I didn't like the duration. I didn't know how long it was going to be. And so for me, that section resonates with performance art, I feel. And then there's also a section where I chopped off the hair, which I again, of course, I didn't rehearse that before. And even from earlier, I wanted to do the section. I don't know how many people saw it, but I'm assuming some of you, where I want to pour blood over myself. Originally, I wanted to use real blood, but I was talked out of it. Because for me, it was again the ritualistic thing, and for me to experience what it would be like with the smell and with the texture, and how that would affect how I would perform it at that moment. Used fake blood, so it's more theatrical. But it was, the consistency was, I specifically worked with asked a makeup artist to make this blood. And I never again rehearsed this before, so it was also, I performed it at that time, and I myself didn't know what the consistency was going to be, what it was going to be like, and how long I was going to do it, and then finally looking at the mirror. In the end, I wanted it to be durational, where I ended the piece, where I wanted to be looking at myself, and I didn't know, I had no plan of when I was going to end it. So possibly, if the audience decided to get up and leave, or they decided to stay, or I wasn't really sure, but I thought maybe when I feel like going, I would go. That's kind of how I wanted. But then what happened was the lights were switched off and people started clapping, as you do in a performance context, and then I decided to leave. So I think these few things, these sections, and the rest of it is choreographed sequence of movement, which is dance, and then there was dialogue, which is of course pre-planned. But for me, these sections I felt I was moving into a performance art arena. And anyway, generally, more and more for me, performance, the way I look at performance is this thing of being in the present moment and performing whatever I'm doing, whether it's in one day, that also I was eating banana, and it changes when you're being observed. So I'm inviting to be seen and knowing the knowledge that you are being watched, and it's not a representation, or it's not about technical virtuosity, or it's that kind of sense of authenticity to what I'm doing. It's difficult to achieve because coming from a dance background and you're taught in a very different way, so it's hard to come into it, but I think that's how I'm exploring this.
Sorry, perhaps to me and to Dr. Constantine, when does when a theatre practitioner and a movement practitioner sort of start experimenting or approaching something that a contemporary interdisciplinary arts practice is, or the principles or the parameters of a contemporary arts practice, when they start approaching that, when do they become relevant in a performance art or a live art context?
Well, okay, I'll start. To me, it's in the head. I think it's totally in your head. I think that if you are training as a performance artist, you are a performance artist. If you're a theatre maker, you are a theatre maker. And so, I agree with this, but that's kind of where my starting point is. And also, I share with you when you reference conceptual work, and that's coming from a conceptual background. It's not coming from a background. Therefore, to me, it's always in the artist's head. And sometimes you go, there's been all sorts of discussions going on around in LA, and about curatorship. What's curating? How is this being curated? You're a curator if you're a curator inside your head. And so to me, I know, and I think the other word I do use, which is a very useful word, is authenticity. By and large, I think that you know if the performance is authentic, and you're pretty certain if you know it's authentic, and the audience will know it's authentic, and actually, to me, it doesn't matter if they don't understand it, because they will all understand it in a different way anyway. By definition, every single person's response to your performance will be different, because they all own it. And if it is authentic, but confusing, that's okay. But if it's not authentic, then they will also know that.
Yeah. For a theatre person, the point when he gets with them is author, text, director, and performance. For the choreographer, for the dancer, get rid of the choreographer and be yourself. Do a concept, it comes, whatever the discipline, it comes as a concept, standalone actors, which can communicate with the concept, then it becomes like John Cage's photo. There is nothing. Music is not there. That's why it became music and music pieces. The dance movements are not there. So it becomes a problem. So for theatre and dance, the point when you give up theatre and dance and you use your movements and the theatre presence, you become performance.
And in terms of dance, it's becoming so much.
Reach back to my down because I want to jump in. I think the understanding and the practice of theatre has evolved so far ahead from the point of director, writer, actor, that it no longer can be defined that way. And that is, in my own practice, the notion of director-writer is very lucid. The idea of director-performer is very lucid. So for me, I think we have to again question our understandings of theatre or what we associate theatre to be. I'm also going to bring up the idea of authenticity. I think that's a very difficult word to place and have one single meaning, particularly in a context like this. Authenticity can mean a lot of things, and depending on your practice, also it can be very different. So maybe I'll leave that with you. I'm not going to discuss authenticity. But going back to the idea of sort of pre-rehearsed performances, and this is something you brought up. For example, there are performances that I have done that are not scripted, that are thought through and presented. Does this stop becoming theatre? And does it start becoming performance art? And where do we draw those boundaries? The other question I'm going to sort of pose, and I'll speak about where for me I made a distinct choice to include performance art moments in a theatre production. So in 2007 it was my first production, and I used the work of 3 poets, and at the time if we presented the script to the censor board, it wouldn't have been a place. So we had to find a place that had cultural immunity in terms of the Goethe, or some place where the state couldn't censor us, and we managed to find a church that allowed us to use the space. So we had to move out all the furniture, and we decided to perform on the floor of the church, but sort of strip the religious connotation to perform at the back of the church. There were 2 moments that we included. One was where an actress turns up on stage. She takes her time removing her jewelry, she ties up her hair, she takes out the butterflies. He lights a candle and singes his wings and leaves. Does it stop being theatre? Does it start becoming performance art? And how do we decide this? I'm a theatre practitioner. Conceptually, that is something I brought to this space. I was working with other performers. Had I done it myself, it would have been a different thing in a theatrical context, because the role of the director-writer means something in a theatre context. And had I performed it as a theatre director, it would have been read very different if somebody who is neutral, sort of in that constellation of sorts, performing. So these are some of the thoughts that I have, and some of the issues I have in the idea of authenticity, and in the idea of, to be a performance artist, you have to stop being a theatre practitioner, or you have to stop being a director. I think we need to understand that it can't be presented in isolation. I think there is a continuum, yes, but it is increasingly about a multidisciplinary approach to creating art. And leave one or the other, or saying one or the other is more significant in this moment, becomes dangerous for me.
I don't think anybody's saying that. I don't think anybody's saying that. I don't think there's a continuum or spectrum of works. It's just that they're different disciplines, and as a theatre director, you're very open, and you're observing lots of tendencies of what's going on in various art forms, and then you're drawing them together and creating the experience that falls upon your experience, and that's something really interesting. And it doesn't place any of the constituent parts that can be brought together in any form of hierarchical work. They're all incredibly strong. So I don't think that's an issue at all.
I think when we started, I think I was sort of responding to what Dr. Continuum said about the idea of stopping. Stop when it becomes you stop being a theatre director and then performance begins. So I was responding to that, and because my input is through theatre, I can't do that. And then what does it mean about? What does it say for my art?
But in the postmodern context, the context also plays an important role in appreciation, because the viewers are going to take the particular form of art with the context. That's why Marshall Bishop's urinal became an art piece. So the context also is important, and in the context, the person who is performing is also becomes important, because the person has been identified in the context. So all these sort of different. You say there is a sort of a meeting point where all arts come together, but the context cannot be dissociated from the form of art.
That's a really important word as well. A few words coming out today. Context is everything. I mean, if you put on a piece of work and it is a piece of performance work, and you put it into a space, a theatrical space, and you and the audience doesn't know, their community. It's rather like if you have a festival like this, and you have a fringe program, or you have a program for emerging artists, and you have a program for very established artists, and you don't differentiate between them. You do everybody a disservice because you can't contextualise this piece of work, which seems to be very thoughtful. Actually, brilliant for this 19-year-old who's, So I think context is really important, and I don't think it's remotely problematic as a theatre director, to observe practice that comes out of performance work and in some way assimilate it into an experience. I think that John Saturday, if I pronounce it correctly, who's the Belgian theatre director, who's one of the greatest directors of his generation. And I went to see a show of his called Parle's Reactional Madness at the Albert Hall, and he was so clever, and he was drawing on everything you see going on in the world at that point, which was probably about 10 or 15 years ago.
I can see that one, but I was thinking that similar things that you said about reportage or other theatre artists. I think they would just, conceptual directors.
I mean, it's really interesting because this particular show, it went on for hours and hours and hours. It went on for about 5 or 6 hours or something like that. And it was in the Albert Hall. And so it was incredibly ambitious. And they filled it. So they filled the Albert Hall in London, which is a big place, but they filled with people who come to see hours and hours and hours of very left field experimental theatre. And one of the things of broken Danish ceramics, naked, with a blindfold on, at which point the entire cast, of whom there were 28, came to the front of the stage and started running on the spot. Not just like that, really running on the spot. And it went on for 45 minutes, whilst the actor, blindfolded, crawled around the stage, finding all the clothes and putting them back on again. And that was it. And I said to the director afterwards, I said, how does that work? And he said, my instruction is exactly that. You have to keep running until you've got all these clothes on. I said, how long does it last? He said, once it did 20 minutes, usually 45, sometimes 2 hours. It was phenomenal. And it was, people went out for a drink, and said, well, come back. But actually, if you're up for it, it was an amazing thing to watch. It was fantastic. But that's where it came from. And it was certainly coming from a fairly brutal sort of performance basis. It wasn't coming from a straight character.
Okay. I'm going to quickly open it up to the audience here for responses, questions, and even if you don't agree, any thoughts.
I'm very new to appreciating performance art. It's a very new thing for me. So there are a couple of questions that kind of confuse me. Performance art, especially if it's experimental, like you said, and if it's not based on anything traditional that is already established. I can understand, but now Vinuri has taken something very traditional, like, I don't know, I think it's a traditional dance practice in Sri Lanka, right? So do you start when you, okay, right? Like, do you study the context of that before you start your performance, or how do you abstract it, like experiment with it?
Of course, I studied, but for me the commentary was not about that, it was something else. I was using the ritual as a framework to talk about a different concept. And there was something somewhere that I was doing some satire on the ritual itself, which is not what I was doing.
Can you call it an abstraction of it, or you just use it as a
elements from it. So the elements from the ritual, there's dance, there's drama, there is the set exorcism, there's the costume, the framing, how the people sit and how the audience kind of engages with it. So I just use those elements in order to create a ritualistic performance, which is something nothing at all to do with the traditional ritual at all. But I use elements. So for example, the bit where I come in and wash with the blood, there's a thing called the Nanamari before the Laharisanyu, where a man versus a woman comes in with this mirror kind of thing and washes himself and combs his hair, and there's the whole thing. And I just subverted that, and I just, instead of that, I use blood and I use a real mirror and comes from that. So it's just using that as a starting point.
And the other question I had is just to all performers. Especially when you take something that is already established and you kind of abstract it, is there a danger of making it kind of trendy and just because you changed it and it becomes kind of a hip performance? I don't know, I'm just trying to understand this whole thing. I don't know whether it's even a valid question actually. But is there a danger of making it trendy and kind of without really putting any thought through?
There's a lot of thoughts put to be done for the performance that I made. A lot of research into the concept I was working with, what I was trying to say. Even the sound is like completely research videos and work that I wanted, specifically that I wanted would still be the sound. So it's like maybe 2 months of only research and then finally
I think for me, maybe if I can just speak for all of you here, you don't have to feel like you need to speak for your work. That perhaps the significance is that when you all invoke the word concept and context, that there is a thought that defines whether it's that you wear a biking hat and you get onto the streets. There is still a thought that defines that work, and that is significant.
I mean, and
Neil still
only because I think, part of my thing about this, I got really because my friend who's my mentor in this, who introduced me to my part, I've been trying to contact him prior to this discussion, and I was trying to get him to enter into the discussion by Skype, but he couldn't because he's at a funeral. But despite the fact that he's at a funeral, he said, he replied to me, he said, about to enter the cemetery for my uncle's funeral, live art should be what it says, live as art, living all its dangerous and quirky comical beauty, exposed to the public eye, critical and hungry for guidance. And I think that's absolutely correct, and it's also correct to say that, to me, you have no choice. Once you become aware of what live art can be and what it means, you actually don't have a choice. It's not like, it's not a trendy thing, it's not something you're doing because it happens to be of the mode, it's because you have to. And for some of the most difficult and dangerous and admirable performance artists, that's also a problem. Because their work, their lives are dangerous, and they find it almost difficult to live because they cannot not be like that. So it's sort of kind of anti-trendy. It's becoming bad and fun. It's very difficult to get paid
I'm
down.
just going to respond to the word trend. I think if something becomes trendy, I don't think a person who did a work should be held responsible for that, personally. But also trend, I mean, there's a trend of journalists being killed. Can you hold the journalist who wrote an article that revealed something about someone responsible for that trend of journalists being killed off? Right? I think there's a danger with thoughtless sort of haphazard work and gimmickry. I call it gimmickry. So if it's about, there's sometimes there's a formula, that you put this and this and this and then
and it kind of works.
It gets a few strong images, you get reviewed maybe.
And you get a reaction.
You get a reaction.
Yeah.
I think there is something to be said about provocation. I think you can provoke through your art, not that all art needs to do that. Sometimes it can be sort of hint at certain things and it can be thought provoking instead of people actually getting out there and wanting to eat your face. But I think that's also not a problem. If there is somebody who is catering to a trend, I mean, if we take dance, we have the Continuum police of this world. Terribly trendy. Good. There are different places that cater to
a certain audience.
Yeah.
No, perhaps I was not articulate enough. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head.
The gimmickry.
The gimmickry, and sometimes you have this certain formula, you put this and that gives, you get a reaction. And I was wondering whether enough thought really goes into the performances. And I know I'm very familiar with your work, so I know a lot does. But
sorry, could I just present a dance, you've actually done something very, very interesting. In that you mentioned that you do all of this research, you think about where the audience is going to sit, how they're going to surround you. So you talked about concept, context, and I want to talk about perception. Because at the end of the day, you are presenting for an audience. And so how far are you thinking about audience perception? How far do you go in your formulation of your idea and visiting the audience reaction or anticipating that in some sense?
It's actually performance, you look at the audience as a passive audience. It's also partly active involved. It's a process that takes place. And as you said, I think I'm not being friendly because I have done theatre work, I have done painting, I have done so many things, but nothing brings in so much of anxiety to performance. It is like putting your self online. It's a demand. It's very demanding because you don't know what the response will be, you don't know whether people will be talking and going on. It is a theatre. There is a distance. Here there is no distance. And it becomes very, very accessible.
And that vulnerability of the performer putting themselves out there. I think any work, when you present, and I guess for a visual artist, the response to your work comes in stages, but for a performer, the response is instant, but also completely shifts what you're doing at that moment. That response. So the Nokia tune, wonderful things, but completely has an effect on the performer.
And also, if you're a performance, you are totally responsible for the entire thing. You can't make the director, you can't make the musician, you can't make the movie. So if you don't communicate, if your speech doesn't come out well, then it will be important. And also there is a tendency, I don't know how to explain that there is always a tendency to take the dangerous one. Like put yourself at me, performance, yes, online. Even people that try to shoot themselves, but because that it's like you cannot perform at them.
No, well, when I used the word trend, what I meant was, if there is an already established practice and you try to change it, and sometimes you change a little bit here and a little bit there. Is there sort of a formula that kind of can be deemed as trendy? And I'm not talking about very new performances, because I don't know. It's just I'm just playing the devil's advocate.
It's not a thought out response. But I was just responding to what you're saying. I think all movements or all work has been in response to something else. So if we take the life of dance, through the years, with contemporary dance or modern dance, and then after that movement and things like that, it was in response to ballet and classical ballet and that. When you take say for your example, I'll take you as an example, your performance. I think there is the context of the performance provoked. It was a Colombo-centric arts festival, and here was an artist who was maybe seen on the right side. You're on the right side of the fence, right? Let's admit that. You're on the right side of the fence. And so when the person on the right side of the fence chooses to take a traditional dance and then turn it on its head, which you did, then the question is it gimmick? Did she know there are going to be drummers, there is going to be the Kali, there is going to be the Westerners sitting and observing this sort of unfolding, dance. What have you done? I think there is that idea also, and I think that's okay. I think that's also a response to a particular work. But I don't think an artist can be faulted for questioning our idea of a traditional dance or its place. So if say the Colombo is presented in the line of bed, what do we do? What do we do? If we have a candid traditional dancer welcoming the bride and the bridegroom at the Mount Avia Hotel, what do we do? And so now those are trendy, and then for a while that has been done. I'm sure, I don't know who people, wedding organizers plan this, and it has been done. So there is a trend, and now it's a normal to have the drummers. And even if you get married in Australia, we fly drummers over and get dancers over, and it's now. And so now, if somebody were to do question something else like you did, does that become gimmickry, or will 3 years down the line that become the norm? And then at which point do we stop experimenting or stop bringing different things to the table?
Which is to just discuss the idea that we have one more panelist here who shows a different mode of expression. And it brings into discussions that when you ask about an audience, the fact that we didn't notice at all during our conversation, does that mean that there was no concept or no context involved? And perhaps at any point if you wander off, you could witness and make your own choices about what's happening on the other end of the hall. But it's been a really interesting discussion, and I think we need to start the conversation by saying perhaps that you didn't think in the live art setting what happened. You tested the idea of eliciting live art. Do you want to just, whoever doesn't mind saying it this way, do you want to perhaps just clarify something like that?
No.
I was just being really nice. Could you clarify? Sorry, just for example, people that you could comment on. And when as a live response to that. That was what was live. I don't know. That was my
I was very funny you did pick on that one, because I like watching him, and I really like the word actors. And when I was watching him, it seems to me like he was
so fluid and it was so natural, so it was almost sort of lyrical the way you did it. Amazing.
And I do take your point, it was not a provocation there, but just to kind of understand, because for me what has been interesting about this discussion itself is that somehow the attempt is made to understand, to talk, and I think the discussion itself for us is a community that's growing in practice and confronting the practice, to clarify, to keep coming and questioning each other on what are these definitions, what are these approaches, what are our perceptions of it, what are our histories that lead to this point. Is always interesting, is always relevant, is always significant. It's really nice to have people who, are somehow in the practice, invested in the practice, and people arriving into the practice and questioning, and I really enjoyed this panel and really enjoyed the audience for all the interventions that came from the audience. So thank you everyone, and please continue.